Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Monday, September 29th, day 724 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Amanda.
Good to see you. All Israeli eyes are on Washington, D.C. today as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets with U.S. President Donald Trump to potentially take steps towards ending the war in Gaza. We are going to learn all about the D.C. meetup in tomorrow's episode. But in the meantime, the IDF said today that Air Force, Navy, and ground forces are all in action as troops push deeper into Gaza City. So Manny is going to fill us in on what is happening in the ground, air, and sea around Gaza. In the second half of the program, we will take a moment to assess the Lebanon front a year after the assassination of former Hezbollah head Hassan Nasrallah. All this and more when we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Manny, before we turn to Gaza, could you please update us on what you know about the car ramming attack on Sunday in the West Bank that took the life of Staff Sgt. Inbar Avraham Kav, who was 20 of the Paratroopers Brigade?
So from what we understand, this attack, which took place at the Jit Junction, which is near the Palestinian town of the same name, and the West Bank settlement of Kdumim, a Palestinian driver in a sort of a truck accelerated towards troops who are operating at the junction and hit Kav, the soldier who was later killed. And then the truck driver then collided with a vehicle in the area. From what we understand from the initial investigation from the army is that the assailant apparently got out of the vehicle, and then other troops at the junction opened fire on the attacker. And this gunfire also hit the paratrooper, who was, of course, later died in hospital from his wounds. It's unclear exactly how badly hurt he was by the ramming. The medics who took him to hospital said he was suffering from a severe head injury, but at least according to the army's investigation, he was sort of caught in this crossfire during the attempts to neutralize the attacker, who, from what we know, is a Palestinian from the Nablus area, and he was also killed in the attack.
And as far as I remember, this is not the first attack in this area in the Jit Junction. And as we spoke about in a previous podcast, much of the IDF is now in the West Bank during this holiday period, including, I believe, the Paratroopers Brigade in full. Is that correct, Manny?
Yeah, that's correct. The paratroopers were previously operating in Gaza. They then were taken out. I think they were in Syria for a little bit, and then they were sent to the West Bank, not back to Gaza. So other forces are operating in Gaza. They were sent to the West Bank instead.
All right, let's turn to Gaza. And the Israeli Air Force struck some 140 targets in the Gaza Strip within the past day, including buildings used by terror groups, operatives, and other infrastructure. The Israeli Navy also operated in Gaza, shelling a weapons depot and other buildings Hamas operatives were using in the Strip's north. And these strikes come as ground troops from 3 IDF divisions continue to push into Gaza City. Let's start with the Navy, Manny. And how are they being deployed during this effort? Of course, we have on the horizon the flotilla, the peace, quote-unquote, flotilla that is set to approach Israel, I believe, on Yom Kippur. So how is the Navy being implemented in the meantime?
So the Navy and its patrol squadron that operates in the south has been operating in Gaza since the beginning of the war. It's not a new thing, but definitely the IDF is trying to highlight it a little bit more in recent days. We are seeing some operations by them. We're seeing strikes being carried out by the 916th Patrol Squadron, mostly in the northern Gaza area. So not in Gaza City, but also in Gaza City. But a lot of strikes we're seeing in northern Gaza, sort of outside Gaza City, the Shati camp area, which is just on the outskirts of Gaza City. And we've seen these strikes against Hamas sites, even against operatives. There was a video the army published a couple of days ago showing a Hamas gunman being killed in an Israeli naval shelling. And this is just mainly the patrol squadron. We haven't seen yet, at least the the Shayatet 13 commandos operating in Gaza right now. They previously did. We saw several raids carried out by the naval commandos in Gaza. And of course, the Navy's bigger ships, the corvettes, those are mostly deployed to defend Israel's gas rigs and also south of Eilat in the Red Sea to intercept Houthi attacks that are launched from Yemen.
Okay, let's turn to airstrikes. And in the past, I believe, 24 hours, there have been airstrikes on quite tall buildings in the Gaza Strip. And also, we are hearing about reports of a hospital compound. So tell us what you know.
The Israeli Air Force has continued these strikes in Gaza City, especially against high-rise towers, saying they're being used by Hamas, mainly for surveillance and also for launching attacks. There was a strike yesterday that took out a building which, according to Palestinian media, was the tallest building, the remaining building in Gaza City. There were taller ones that had been taken out previously. And we also saw a video from the army published this morning that was a drone video that soldiers sent into a tall building. And on the 6th floor, they found a bomb that was planted there that was, of course, intended to target troops. So these tall buildings do pose a pretty big threat to soldiers, especially because Hamas could have positions in them to fire at troops from above. And there's quite a lot of these tall buildings in Gaza City, especially in the more upscale areas. But we are seeing, I would say, day to day, more than 100 strikes carried out by the army. They reported 140 today. They reported more than 100 yesterday. So the rate of attacks is steady, but this does come as troops push deeper into the city.
All right, let's talk about the reports of attacks on a hospital compound.
So we've seen these reports of these strikes. Of course, all of Gaza City has been under evacuation order for several weeks now. That includes the hospitals, and we've even seen some hospitals in coordination with Israel move to southern Gaza. But this report that we saw last night was that Shifa Hospital, the sort of the main hospital in Gaza City, had completed sort of a full evacuation. And then there was another nearby hospital in Gaza City, the Al Hilu Hospital, that was apparently hit by 2 shells, possibly tank shells. They didn't report an airstrike there. They reported tank shelling, and that internet connection is shut down there. I haven't heard a comment from the army yet, so it's not sort of clear exactly what's happened, but it's a relatively small private hospital, the Al Hilu one, not like a huge one where loads of people are sheltering there. Unlike Shifa, where many hundreds, possibly even thousands of Palestinians were sheltering in the area of the hospital. But that area, of course, has evacuated with the advance of IDF troops in the area.
Let's talk about Hamas claims yesterday that it had lost contact with 2 hostages during operations in a pair of Gaza City neighborhoods. What do you know about this claim? Is it founded at all?
I don't want to sound like I trust Hamas here, and of course, everything that they put out is with the intention of, psychological warfare, trying to influence the hostage negotiations, to try and pressure, Israel into giving up more in exchange for the hostages. Of course, Hamas is a terrorist organization holding Israeli civilians ransom. But putting all that aside, Hamas in the past has made similar claims, and they have actually turned out to be true. They claimed that, I think it was with Idan Alexander, the Israeli-American soldier who was abducted. Hamas put out a statement claiming that they had lost contact with him after an Israeli strike, and they later found him inside a tunnel that had partially collapsed, and they made this whole claim, and nobody in Israel was really buying it until Idan Alexander was released, and he actually confirmed that something like that had happened. Maybe Hamas exaggerated it a little bit. So this claim of losing contact with 2 hostages, it could be Hamas is correct here. It could just be something very minor that, the internet's down and then are unable to speak with those who are holding the 2 hostages. What I think is very interesting is that Hamas detailed the locations of where these hostages were. So they mentioned 2 neighborhoods in Gaza City, which is unusual to see Hamas actually indicate a very exact location of where the hostages are being held. And I will also add on top of all of this, Hamas doesn't have their military spokesperson anymore, Abu Ubaidah. He was killed in an Israeli strike about a month ago now. So It's unclear if this is some sort of new strategy by whoever's operating their propaganda apparatus now, or maybe they're just confused and accidentally leaked this information. They're definitely, at least from the things I'm seeing, they're definitely a little bit less organized now without Abu Ubaidah in charge.
And in the meantime, some 800,000 Gazans have left Gaza City. What can you tell us about the efforts to have the residents relocate?
So the rate of Palestinians leaving Gaza City has definitely increased in recent days. It was slow in the beginning, but as the troops advance and as I expected, the second they start seeing tanks in the area, the civilians are quickly leaving. There isn't much time left, I would say, for them to leave because the army, at least according to reports from the ground in Gaza, is advancing deeper into the city and encircling the area. Meaning that possibly within a few days, the army will have fully encircled Gaza City, and then anyone who does want to leave will need to do so through army checkpoints, which has been done previously in the war. But this also means that Hamas fighters who are trying to leave the area are going to be identified as members of the terror group by Israel, and they won't be able to leave, and Israel will either detain them or kill them if they engage in combat. So that time is sort of nearing. So there's about 200,000, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more civilians in Gaza City, and the army estimates that there are several thousand Hamas operatives in the area, possibly 2,000, maybe a bit more. The actual estimations are unclear, and I will say that the army's estimations of how many terror operatives there are in certain areas of Gaza has proven to be inaccurate previously, so it's hard to rely on those numbers.
And Manny, are you hearing anything about the timeline of the takeover of Gaza City or the goal of taking over Gaza City?
So we're at sort of the initial phase of encircling the city, and we are seeing that sort of that's happening and getting very close to this completion of encircling Gaza City. And I think the army is waiting anyway to see if more civilians will leave before Gaza City is completely cut off. And then Israel will move on to this next stage of actually entering the city, sort of deeper into the city, and then going on to clear it of all the Hamas infrastructure. How long that will take, it's unclear to me. And of course, this also comes amid all these talks of hostage negotiations and Trump's plan to bring about a ceasefire deal. But I think it's possibly within days, we'll see the encirclement of Gaza City being completed. The next stages could take much longer, and I've heard the army, at least in the beginning of the operation, they said it could take months to complete this whole operation.
Okay, let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. A ballistic missile launched by the Houthis in Yemen at Israel overnight Sunday was intercepted by air defenses, and there were no immediate reports of impacts or injuries. This comes among a number of other missiles. Of course, we're hearing that the head of this was a cluster bomb head, which we've discussed on previous podcasts. Correct me if I got the jargon wrong. But Manny, this, of course, also comes after a recent intense operation, airstrikes on Yemen. So tell us what you know.
So yes, another Houthi missile. Unfortunately for those living in Tel Aviv, this one was at around 1 a.m., which is not really the best time to be getting up and running to the bomb shelter. But I think what I do want to stress here is the fact that the Houthis claim this was again a cluster bomb warhead. These missiles don't have the usual 300, 400, 500 kilogram warhead, which causes massive devastation. They have this mechanism that opens up in the air, usually at like 7, 8, maybe 10 kilometers in the air, and deploys these smaller submunitions, which sort of fall to the ground. They're not guided or anything like that. And because of this, I think the Home Front Command emphasizes this, that when you go to the bomb shelter, you should remain there for 10 minutes because of the falling debris. And in cases like this with the cluster bomb warhead, even if the missile is intercepted and blown up in the air, these submunitions, some of them may not be destroyed in the air, and they could fall down and still cause damage. Not the first time the Houthis have launched it. they're, of course, supplied by Iran. Iran launched cluster bomb ballistic missiles at Israel during the war in June. It's a challenge. And the Houthis, again, they're just continuing with these attacks on Israel despite Israeli strikes in Yemen. The last strikes were the sort of the largest ever conducted by the Israeli Air Force in Yemen. And an hour later, they fired another missile at Israel. So it's not really deterring them. And, from what I'm being told from the army, they are working on trying to figure out what will work against the Houthis. And I think what we will see is eventually, if the war in Gaza calms down at some point, then the Houthis will become the main front, similar to how a year ago Lebanon and Hezbollah became Israel's main front for a few months, and then Israel decimated Hezbollah. I think the Houthis will eventually get their turn, and that's at least what the defense minister has been promising and other Israeli officials have been promising.
Okay, that is a perfect segue to our next item. And thousands of Hezbollah supporters gathered on Saturday at the tomb of slain leader Hassan Nasrallah to commemorate 1 year since his assassination by an Israeli airstrike. And as Hezbollah supporters marked the anniversary, Lebanese media at least reported Israeli drones flying above the ceremony in Beirut's southern suburbs. The Israeli military didn't immediately comment, but earlier this year, Israeli warplanes also flew at a low altitude over the Lebanese capital during the funeral of Nasrallah. Okay, Manny, we are a year from the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. And so let's take a few minutes and assess the changes on the Lebanon front. What are you seeing?
So we're in a ceasefire, technically, with Lebanon, but we are seeing almost daily strikes against Hezbollah commanders and assets as well. Yesterday there was a strike on weapon depots belonging to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. These are sort of cases where Israel has identified it and reported it to this mechanism that's overseeing the ceasefire. And if the Lebanese army doesn't really deal with it within an adequate amount of time, then Israel goes ahead and destroys them in strikes. But a year on, we're seeing a very different Hezbollah. We're not seeing Hezbollah attacking Israel. Apart from one time, I think it was a few weeks into the ceasefire, they launched a couple mortars at an empty hill. But apart from that, nothing. Almost, we hear threats from Naim Qassem, the new leader, but we are not seeing any attacks on Israel. We are seeing efforts by Hezbollah to regroup and rearm, but it's definitely a lot more difficult for them with the loss of Assad in Syria. They don't have that route anymore to bring in weapons, and we're even seeing the new Syrian government confiscating weapons that were intended to reach Hezbollah in Lebanon, because the new Syrian government very much does not like Hezbollah. So they've seized rockets and missiles and assault rifles, really incredible amounts of weaponry seized by Syria, so they don't have that route anymore. And Israel's continued its attacks. I think 500 strikes on Hezbollah sites was reported a few months ago. Hundreds of members of the terror group have been killed in these strikes. And I think this will continue as long as Hezbollah's trying to regroup and rearm. Israel will continue these strikes against what it says are violations of the ceasefire agreement. And all of this comes during efforts by Lebanon themselves, by the Lebanese government, to disarm Hezbollah, which could go ahead, and we reported on the Times of Israel a few months ago that the IDF believes that the constant strikes on Hezbollah and the efforts to keep them from rearming could actually bring them to complete disarmament by the Lebanese government. But it's quite it could be just a way away, not something imminent. But I think this sort of situation that we're in will continue for as long as it takes until they completely disarm.
Right. The ceasefire was struck on November 27th, I believe. So we're almost a year from that. And from what you're saying, it sounds to me as if Iran is still trying to rearm Hezbollah, its prime terrorist group, or once was at least its prime terrorist group, and that the routes are disabled at this point. But what it sounds like is that the will to rearm Hezbollah remains. Is that accurate?
Accurate. The will always be there. I think there's no reason to assume that Hezbollah won't want to try and target Israel, and they may try in other ways. They might try and rebuild their overseas efforts. Of course, in the past, Hezbollah has carried out deadly attacks against Israelis and against Jews in Europe, in South America as well. So it wouldn't surprise me, for example, if Hezbollah decide, well, we're going to give up on trying to fire rockets at Israel, but we'll go and try and kill Jews abroad instead. The will be there, and Iran is, of course, trying to supply them. From what I understand, it's mainly trying to supply Hezbollah with money now, trying to smuggle cash to Hezbollah, which can help it regroup and rearm and rebuild, and less weapons, because weapons are big and much more difficult. And with the lack of flights going between Lebanon and Iran, it's definitely a much bigger challenge for them. And in terms of Hezbollah's manpower, we don't really talk about this too much, but Hezbollah had around 25,000 conscripted operatives before all the fighting, and around 5,000 of them were killed, and another 9,000 were wounded enough that they're unable to fight. So that's more than half of them that are gone, and it's unclear if Hezbollah are even going to go and try and recruit that many more operatives, or they're going to go for a smaller sort of organization, reorganize their structure and go for a smaller terrorist organization with how many fighters it has, which is, I think, to me, quite interesting to see which route Hezbollah tries to go. And Israel, of course, is tracking all of this and will attempt to prevent them from doing anything that would pose a threat to Israel.
Super interesting, Manny. Thank you so much for all of these insights.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.